My sister tried to turn our parents against me to steal their will. When I found out, I confronted her in front of everyone, and her reaction was priceless. I don't even know where to begin. I never thought I'd be sharing this story with strangers on the internet, but maybe putting it out there will help me finally come to terms with it. Because honestly, I still feel like I'm standing in the middle of some surreal nightmare I can't wake up from. All these years, I thought family was supposed to be the one thing you could count on. I thought blood meant loyalty, a safety net no one could tear apart. But my sister proved me wrong, and I don't think I'll ever look at her, or my parents, the same way again. Let me back up. My name's Anson, and I'm in my 40s, still living in Aberdeen, North Carolina, where I grew up. Small town, small life, I guess. I work as an administrator at the high school, which might sound boring, but I love it. The familiarity, the rhythm of the seasons, there's a comfort in it that I've always craved. My younger sister, Lyra, well, she's always been the opposite of me. Lyra's 2 years younger, and growing up, we were as close as any siblings could be. She was always more outgoing, a bit more dramatic, with a natural knack for getting people to listen to her. I was the quiet one, the one who'd listen. When we were little, she used to say, "You're my big brother, you're supposed to look out for me." And I did. I'd protect her from bullies, help her with school projects, and make her grilled cheese sandwiches when she was upset. That bond stuck with me, even as we got older and drifted apart. Or so I thought. As we grew up, our lives took different paths. I stayed close to home, working at the school and taking care of our parents as they got older. Lyra, though, she was the wild one. She moved to Charlotte, met some guy named Ethan, who worked in finance, and started this whole life I hardly recognized. She'd breeze into town for a weekend or two every year, wearing clothes that screamed money, with a handbag that probably cost more than my car, and an attitude to match. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't bitter. People grow. They change. But every time she'd visit, it was like she was looking at our life here through a lens of pity, or even disdain. Lyra would laugh about Aberdeen, calling it quaint with a smirk. But I kept my thoughts to myself, figuring she'd been swept up in her new life, and that was okay. Then, about 2 years ago, our dad was diagnosed with Parkinson's. Everything changed after that. The man who used to coach Little League and sing Sinatra while he grilled out back was suddenly having trouble even buttoning his own shirt. It broke something in me to see him like that, but it was worse to see Mom, who tried so hard to keep things normal. I did what I could, took Dad to his appointments, managed their finances, fixed things around the house. I wanted them to feel like they still had their dignity. Lyra, meanwhile, would call every so often, always saying she'd come down soon, but never committing to a date. She visited 3 times that year, and each time, she'd show up late, stay for a day or two, then leave before the weekend was over. One time, after she left, Mom was sitting by the window, looking at the road where Lyra's car had just disappeared. Her shoulders were slumped, and I swear, she looked older than I'd ever seen her. "Mom?" I asked, sitting down beside her. She shook her head, blinking quickly. "It's just Lyra, she doesn't know how hard it's been. She talks like she understands, but she's barely here." I wanted to tell her that I was there, that I'd do whatever they needed. But Mom just sighed and changed the subject, and I didn't push it. After all, she was right. Lyra didn't know what it was like to see Dad struggling every day, trying to be himself while his body betrayed him. Then, last Christmas happened. Lyra called ahead, saying she and Ethan were coming down for a few days to spend the holidays with us. For a moment, I thought maybe it would be different this time. Maybe she'd finally see what life had been like for Mom and Dad, and maybe we'd all feel like family again. I made a point of getting her room ready, put on fresh sheets, fluffed the pillows, dusted the shelves. I even put a little poinsettia in there, just like she used to love as a kid. She showed up on Christmas Eve, fashionably late as always, stepping out of her car in heels that sunk right into the mud of our driveway. I almost laughed, watching her try to pull them free without getting dirt on her designer jeans. "Anson, you're supposed to put gravel here," she exclaimed, frowning at the ground. "It's just dirt, Lyra," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Maybe next time wear boots." She rolled her eyes, muttering something under her breath about small towns. I ignored it, gave her a quick hug, and tried to make the best of it. But from the start, there was this tension. Every time I turned around, she was whispering to Mom, casting these sidelong glances my way. I kept brushing it off, trying to tell myself it was just Lyra being Lyra, maybe complaining about the house or making suggestions on how they should modernize. I figured she'd be back to Charlotte soon enough, and everything would go back to normal. But then, one night after dinner, I caught a piece of their conversation. They'd thought I'd gone upstairs, but I'd come back down to grab my phone. As I passed the hallway, I heard Lyra say in this hushed, almost rehearsed tone, "I just think it's only fair, Mom. Anson's already getting the house, so I don't see why he should get everything else, too." My heart stopped. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just stood there, listening as Lyra continued, her voice getting softer, more persuasive. You know how much Ethan and I have sacrificed, how hard we've worked for what we have. And Anson's comfortable here, he's got the house, he's happy. I just don't want to end up with nothing, you know? After all I've done for you both. What she'd done for them. She wasn't here. I was the one who was here every single day, the one who'd been changing Dad's clothes, making sure they had groceries, handling all the little things Lyra had no idea about. But there she was, speaking as if I were the one who was taking advantage, as if she were the victim. Then I heard Mom's voice, soft but hesitant. But Anson. He's been such a help, Lyra. He's been here. I don't know if it's fair to ask him to give up more. And then Lyra's response, cold and calculated, Mom, I'm just trying to look out for myself. If Anson were in my shoes, I know he'd understand. It's only fair. I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed into the room, catching both of them off guard. Lyra's eyes widened, but then she quickly composed herself, giving me that fake, sympathetic smile I'd grown to hate. Oh, Anson. We were just talking about you, she said, like nothing was wrong. Yeah, I heard, I replied, trying to keep the tremble out of my voice. I heard every word. Mom started to say something, but I raised my hand. No, Mom, I need to say this. Lyra, do you have any idea what it's been like here? Do you even care? I'm here every day, helping them, and you waltz in here, trying to take more than your share, because apparently I'm comfortable? Lyra's face shifted, her mask slipping just a little. Anson, you're making this a lot more dramatic than it needs to be. I was just having a discussion with Mom. I didn't mean anything by it. Yes, you did, I shot back, my voice rising. You meant every word. You've barely been here, Lyra. I'm the one who's been keeping things together. And now you think you deserve more? More than me? She crossed her arms, her lips curling into a smug smile. Oh, don't act so noble, Anson. You stayed here because you couldn't make it anywhere else. It's not like you've sacrificed anything. My chest tightened, the words stinging more than they should have. That's not true. I chose to be here. I chose to be with them, to make sure they were okay. And you know what? I thought you'd at least respect that, instead of coming here to manipulate them. By now, Mom looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. Anson, please. This isn't the time. No, Mom, I interrupted, it is the time. I want to know right now if you're really considering changing your will because Lyra thinks she's entitled to more. Mom hesitated, looking from me to Lyra. We wanted to make sure everything was fair. And Lyra, her voice now sickeningly sweet, added, exactly. It's just about fairness, Anson. I'm sure you can understand that. I stared at her, at this person who was supposed to be my sister, my family. No, Lyra. Fairness would be you getting what you've put in. And you haven't put in a damn thing. The room was so quiet after I finished that you could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. My mother's face was pale, her eyes darting between me and Lyra, clearly torn. Lyra, on the other hand, didn't miss a beat. She took a deep breath, crossed her legs, and leaned back in her chair like she'd just won a debate. You're so dramatic, Anson, she sneered, her voice full of that smug superiority that I'd grown to resent. You really think this little speech is going to change anything? Mom and Dad can make their own choices. And if they think it's only fair for me to get a little more after all my sacrifices, then who are you to judge? The sheer nerve of it nearly took my breath away. Sacrifices? What sacrifices? Lyra had been gone for years, living her flashy life, barely lifting a finger to help our parents. I could feel the anger building up, a slow burn that had been simmering for far too long. But I knew shouting at her wouldn't get through. So I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and chose my words carefully. Sacrifices, Lyra? You mean the sacrifices like me showing up here day after day, helping them with things you can't even be bothered to think about? Like dealing with the bills, making sure Dad gets to his appointments, handling the house repairs? Or maybe you're talking about your sacrifice of barely calling or showing up once a year? Her eyes narrowed, her face hardening. I don't need to justify myself to you, she snapped, her tone dripping with contempt. You're just bitter because you don't have a real life outside of this little town. But don't blame me for wanting more. Wanting more? I laughed, a bitter sound that I barely recognized. You've always wanted more, Lyra. It's never been enough for you. But what's shocking is that you'd go so low to get it, even turning our parents against me. She rolled her eyes, as if I was just a petulant child having a tantrum. You're delusional, Anson. They're adults. If they agree with me, that's their choice. They're not helpless just because you happen to be their personal errand boy. I felt a surge of something new, a sense of purpose. For so long, I'd held back, thinking I was the good sibling, that if I kept my head down and did the right thing, the truth would speak for itself. But looking at Lyra now, at the person who was supposed to be my sister, I realized I had to do more. I had to make sure she couldn't manipulate them like this. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I sat down with Mom and Dad the next morning, just the three of us. They looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, but I knew I had to get everything out in the open. Mom, Dad, I began, my voice calm but firm, we need to talk. Lyra is trying to take advantage of you. I've been here with you, through everything, and I think you both know what's fair. But you're letting her guilt you into something that isn't right. I don't want to make this a competition, but I need to protect myself, too. And I need you to see this for what it is, manipulation. They exchanged a look, visibly uncomfortable, but after a long silence, Dad spoke up. His voice was softer than usual, a little tremor in it that made my chest ache. Anson, it's not that we don't appreciate everything you've done for us. We do, and we always will. It's just, we wanted to be fair to both of you. You are fair, I said firmly. You've always been fair. But what Lyra's asking for isn't fairness. She's asking you to take something away from me that I've earned, just because she thinks she's entitled to more. Mom sighed, her face etched with worry. I think you're right, Anson. Maybe we were just trying to keep the peace, but it's not fair to you. Relieved, I thought that maybe, just maybe, this would be the end of it. But Lyra, ever the opportunist, had one more card to play. The next day, Lyra announced she was leaving early. She stormed out of the house in tears, complaining to anyone who would listen that I was being cruel and selfish, turning our parents against her. I watched as she sped away in her car, feeling an odd mix of relief and unease. I knew she wouldn't give up that easily. And I was right. 2 weeks later, I received a phone call from a lawyer representing Lyra. She was claiming that she had a verbal agreement with our parents to inherit a larger share of their estate, and she was prepared to take it to court if necessary. It was a move so brazen, so underhanded, that for a moment I was stunned. But then, a plan started to form in my mind. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not this time. Over the next few months, I quietly began documenting everything I'd done for my parents over the years. I kept receipts, took photos, even gathered statements from neighbors and friends who could attest to the care I'd given them. It wasn't that I wanted to go to court, I didn't. But I needed to protect myself. And just as I suspected, Lyra was only getting started. She started planting seeds, telling our parents I was just after their money, trying to paint herself as the innocent one. I could tell they were torn, but I didn't confront her directly. Instead, I let her dig her own grave. A few months later, my parents called me to say they'd updated their will and wanted me to come over to discuss it. I went, bracing myself for whatever fresh hell Lyra had concocted. But when I got there, I was met with a surprise. Mom and Dad had finally seen through her lies. They'd written her out completely, leaving everything to me, not because I wanted it, but because they realized that all Lyra cared about was the money. And in one last, ironic twist, they added a clause that stated that any attempt to contest the will would result in an automatic forfeiture of her inheritance. I could almost hear her screams when she found out. But the final nail in the coffin? I decided to do something that would ensure she could never touch a single penny. After my parents passed, I donated a significant portion of the estate to the local hospital and community center, setting up a small scholarship fund in my parents' names. The family home went to me, as my parents had originally intended, but I made sure that the rest of the money would go to causes that meant something to them, something tangible. When Lyra found out, she called me, screaming into the phone. "You stole from me!" she shrieked. "You're just as selfish as I always knew you were." I waited for her to finish her tirade, then quietly said, "I didn't steal anything, Lyra. I gave back to the people who actually needed it. That's something you'll never understand." And with that, I hung up, feeling a strange peace settle over me. I'd fought for my family, for myself, and finally cut Lyra out of my life for good. That was the last time I ever spoke to her.